How have you made a rude person's day worse? I work in local theater, and we have a lot of rude, awful women who are part of local ballet schools come through our venue who are the mothers of the dancers. Once this woman rang up wanting seats to an almost sold out ballet performance that had been on sale for 4 months the day before the show, and did nothing but abuse me for 5 minutes because she left buying them too late, whined about how she shouldn't have to pay for her kids, whined that we should get a bigger venue, it seats just under 500. Then put me on hold while she rang 3 of her relatives to see if they wanted seats too. She was positively awful. The seats I was about to sell her were the only ones in the theater left, and they were good seats. While I'm on hold, a grandma of one of the ballerinas comes to the desk and asks if we have any seats left, as she'd been in hospital and couldn't buy them earlier, but said she'd understand if we were booked out. I put the phone with the on hold music down and sold this old lady the last seats for the show and gave her an invite to our next year's dance season for her granddaughter and herself, so she'd know exactly when all the important dates were coming. She thanked me over and over, and she's now one of our regulars and brings her grandkids to our shows. 2 minutes after the old lady leaves, the beach on the other end finally takes me off hold and says she wants the remaining seats that we have left. I tell her sorry, we've just sold out while you had me on hold, I'm afraid. Better luck next year. Anything else I can help you with? She was choking with rage on the other end of the phone. It was fantastic. Female Redditor. I was out at the local watering hole having a few beers with a group of friends. The group became larger and larger with time. After a while I got semi-separated from my fiancé. I was introduced to a guy. We'll call him Bob. The introduction went like this. Bob, this is psychocentric. Bob. To which he says, every psychocentric I've ever met is a slut and a faking hoe. Now, I don't get bent out of shape without good reason, so I just brush it off as drunk banter, or maybe a recent breakup with a psychocentric and say, ha, well, I'm neither, but nice to meet you anyway, Bob, and shook his hand. The rest of the night, he would go to the bar, walk back and give me the stink eye. For whatever reason, he didn't like me. The feeling was becoming mutual. I decided ignoring him would probably be best. He was certainly not in his right mindset. Right, a few hours passed, and I was sitting by his female friend, having fun talking and giggling. He puts his elbows on the table in between us, staring at me like I had done him wrong somehow. I just kept on with our conversation and ignored him. He then puts his nasty face right next to mine and said, so, are you a slut? My temper and alcohol got the best of me. I yelled no, and what the fuck is your problem exactly? I've been doing my best to ignore you. Get a faking clue. He then chest bumped me and said, do you wanna go? I'm all for equal rights, but this was the first time an able-bodied adult male has asked me, a girl, if I wanted to throw down. I walk over a few steps to my fiance, who is talking to a bouncer friend of ours, and said, this guy says he wants to kick my ass. While the douche just keeps advancing. The bouncer looks at him, gives a hand signal. Soon 5 red shirts, bouncer uniforms, surround him. He was escorted out of the bar and went to his minivan. Drunk. I called work. I work for the sheriff's department. They got a good tip on a sure thing DUI. I might not have thrown down, but I think I won that round. I used to work for the Department of Motor Vehicles, and the one I worked at had pretty limited parking. Surprise. I had left for lunch, came back and was having a hard time finding a place to park. I finally found a spot, so I drove up to it and put my signal on showing that I was waiting for it. People, in my experience, usually respect this and continue on. Not this time. Just as the car was backing out, after I had waited a few minutes, a car came from the opposite side of the lot, made eye contact with me, and then shot right into the parking space. I was so mad, because now I would be late, after looking for a new spot. As I drove past the woman that had taken the spot, I just shook my head, and she responded by shrugging her shoulders, smiling, mouthing the words, oh well to me, and then ran her finger from her eye down her cheek, as if to mock me crying about it. I continued into work, got in trouble for being late, but had actually forgotten about the incident until whose number gets called to my station, but Miss Spot Stealer herself The look on her face was priceless. Keep in mind that I'm not your average DMV worker. I understand that stuff happens and waive penalties all the time and treat my customers with respect because I believe that what goes around comes around, and I know how crappy it is to wait at the DMV all day. I'm usually so nice about getting penalties taken off of people's accounts that I get in trouble for it at times. So I greet Spot Stealer as nice as I would anyone else. In fact, it may have been nicer than I normally would be. She may have thought I didn't recognize her. Her registration is far past due, with hundreds due in penalties. I'll let her tell me her whole sob story, then finally tell her that she owes in full because she was aware of her due date. She argues it a little until, out of sight from my manager, I mouth the words, "Oh well," and drag my finger from my eye to my cheek, mocking her tears. At that point she puts her head down and proceeds to take out her card and pay the full amount because yes, we do take debit cards. What goes around comes around. I was waiting tables in an Italian restaurant that was originally opened by a man and his wife, but after their divorce, the restaurant was bought by their daughter. She was an okay boss, not fantastic, but not terrible. Her father, who had opened the restaurant, still worked as a cook and was a piece of shit. He called the waitresses cunts behind their backs and made a bunch of off-color comments while flirting with his favorite old ladies. He would scream at the younger women, bully cooks on the line, and there was a story about a mishap with some fryer oil and a fry cook a few years back. He didn't give me a lot of shit because I was usually on my game. I had the times down for how long most of the food took and adjusted for the load of the kitchen, so I was always present in the window when it was ready to go out. I always heard his snide little comments, muttered some of my own at him a few times, but I always waited for the perfect time to get him and get him good for being such an insufferable prick. Finally, I got my chance. I had 2 plates up in the window when I walked into the kitchen. I was waiting on a third and a side of meatballs. He accosts me as soon as I walk up there and says something along the lines of, "Why don't you get this faking food out of my window?" I calmly looked at him and replied, "The next time you say something like that to me, this food is not going out. This food is going on the faking floor." This guy was easily 6 feet tall. I'm 5 feet 1 inch. He just kind of smirks and said, "I'd like to see you try that." I picked up 1 plate of spaghetti and meat sauce, probably takes less than a minute to plate anyway, and just flipped it over in the window, and I need my order of lasagna and the side of meatballs. 2. The expo guy had a look of admiration on his face and shock at what I had done. He didn't even seem pissed at having to replate the meal. I'm not sure, though, I was blind with rage and marched out of the kitchen and out onto the floor. We really weren't that busy. I think they had a bus kid clean it up. I wasn't spoken to about the incident except in passing, when the daughter admitted her dad could get a little intense, and her sister, who also worked there, explained that her sister often got into it with their father, and it wasn't that big of a deal. He was always polite to me after that, and never hassled me again. I nearly shit myself when I realized what I had done, though TLDR, I'm a spaghetti murderer and waitress hero. My husband and I were driving just over an hour home from my in-laws' house, and for reasons I can't remember, we were in separate vehicles. To make the trip more tolerable, we had each other on speakerphone. Although the highway was not particularly crowded, he was a bit further behind me, directly behind another car that was driving very slow. So, he put on his left blinker to go around the guy. As soon as he started to move left, the guy abruptly cut him off, only to keep at a snail's pace in the passing lane. By that point, I had slowed down enough to catch sight of them right as this was happening. Jay, being much more patient than I, decided to just pass him on the right without signaling. When Jay started to move right, the guy swerved right. Only, Jay hadn't given him the benefit of a blinker warning, so they were nearly side by side by the time the other guy started to move right, and the guy had to swerve back into his own lane to avoid hitting Jay before the other driver had time. To make it more of a nonsense pissing match of trying to get in front of one another, I was slowed down right in front of him. Again, there really weren't many other cars on the road at all, and since we were on the phone, we could coordinate. I slowed down in front of him. Jay kept pace with him on the right and he had the cement wall on his left, so he was boxed in and forced to slow down to our pace, which for me dropped from 75 miles per hour to about 50 miles per hour. We decided to keep it that way for the remaining 45 minutes of our drive home. He never signaled or honked, but he did make a ton of confused and frustrated faces. I giggled uncontrollably the whole way. Definitely worth the extended driving time. I was sitting in my car making some photos with my new smartphone while using different settings. Then there was this woman who just stopped at an one-way street with only one lane. So she stands there for like 10 seconds doing nothing. And I thought this is very unusual, so I started to make a video. Another driver comes and honks. She then proceeds to rear and hit the car of the other guy with her big BMW. 4 guys jumped out of the BMW and start yelling at the guy. You have to know in Germany always the one who hits another car from behind will be blamed if he can't prove that it wasn't his fault. So we have a classic insurance fraud point. The poor guy at the back was really worried cause he knew he couldn't prove it. I just sit there in my car and waited for the police. Then I go outside and the police started to get the stories. Of course they were 4 against 1 guys. I just stood there and listened the woman complaining about who this idiot hits her from behind and her brand new car is now damaged. After the police took the statement from both sides and even take my statement, they said there is no chance that 2 vs 4 could prove that he didn't do it. 2 of the guys at the BMW said they didn't know the girl and were pedestrians who saw it. That would increase the credibility point. So they made all false statements to the police and exactly that's the thing I wanted to happen. I then told the police, oh wait, there is just one thing, like Columbo style, and said that I got a video of what happened. I showed them to the police and the women and the drivers just stand there with mouth open. You could not only see how she hits his car, but also that the pedestrians were with the women in the car. The guy then hugs me and we became good friends. Turns out he lives near me and we spend the evening drinking and gaming. .SRY for bad English in German. I'm a manager at a grocery store, so I get awesomely rude customers on a daily. Every Wednesday is senior discount day. You have to be 55 to 60 to qualify for the discount. Needless to say, Wednesdays are tense. Lots of seniors and lots of other people who don't want to deal with the seniors. I don't generally mind the old folks. Most of them are pretty cool and have some interesting stories and cute jokes. This Wednesday there was one particular customer who was being a huge pain in the ass from the moment she walked in. She was tall, blonde, high heels, very made up, and dressed to the nines. She was probably late 30s to early 40s. She came storming up to customer service. There are no parking spots. This is ridiculous. I'm going to request to corporate that you expand your parking lot, since you don't seem to have the initiative to request that yourself. Off to a great start, lady. She comes storming back up about 45 minutes later. I'm in a huge hurry, and every line has someone in it. I need to check out here. We had 3 lines open, and each one had one single customer. I say no problem, but I'll get you at a checkout. You have too many items to get here. She has a huge hissy fit. I don't have time for this. Let's go. As I'm checking her out, it is constant beaching. You only have one brand of MAC. That is ridiculous. I only wear MAC, but I was going to settle for Evelyn, but you don't even have that. Now I have to make a whole separate trip. Please don't put my bread on top of my eggs. The eggs could roll over and crush the bread. Please bag my avocados separately. I need to use those for a face mask tonight. They need to be perfect. I have a photo session for work tomorrow. I'm in a magazine. She was unbelievable. Finally, at the end, I had enough pointers. She's about to pay. I say, don't forget today is senior discount day. You get 5% off. She just stared at me. What? I smiled broadly. Every Wednesday, senior citizens get 5% off their bill. I'll go ahead and take it off. You are 55 to 60, right? She is staring at me, debit card in hand, cheeks getting red. I lose my smile slowly and say, oh, you don't qualify? Sorry about that. Maybe next year. Thanks for your honesty. I haven't seen her in the store since. TLDR, I provided unsolicited marriage counseling services to a dickhead. I worked at a hotel several years ago and had to deal with insufferable pricks about a dozen times a day. Hotel stories about Billy Mays watching Granny Born, a person that threw hot coffee in my face, a person that spit on me, and a crazy lady that slapped me are in my comment history. The best/most evil revenge I ever got was on a guy that stayed with us 4 days a week for the entire 5 years I worked at the hotel. The big utility company in our area was having financial issues, and he was the leader of the auditing team that was sent in to straighten it out. Anyway, I would interact with the guy at least a few times every day I worked, and he was always very rude and condescending. As an example, one of his co-workers would ask me for a local restaurant recommendation and he would chime in with yeah, because minimum wage workers are known for their taste in fine dining. If someone asked me something personal, he would say something like ask him what life choices he made to be here plunging toilets, and writing down my preferred wake up call time. Maybe he can share his wisdom, so we all avoid his fate. Stuff like that. He was just a jackass to everyone on the hotel staff, and was always very demanding. Since I saw him every day, I noticed that he had developed a relationship with one of the younger women on his auditing team. I saw their romance blossom from flirting to full-on groping and grinding in the hotel lobby. One day he had just finished delivering one of his delightfully sheety bon mots to me, and I was fuming. Then he screamed at one of my co-workers because she had a Filipino accent, and he said he only wanted his room cleaned by white Americans. I vowed revenge. This is when the mother basically leans across the table into my face and says, all of you male teachers are the same. You only care about looking at these young girls. They get special treatment. I know your kind. You make me sick. Now, at the time, this was my second year teaching, and being in my late 20s I was one of the youngest males on the staff. I was pretty shaken by this, because we all know how fine a line must be walked when dealing with accusations of this nature. In college, I had a wide gap of time between classes, about 9 AM to noon. I'd usually go to the art room, art and design major, and just paint or draw. Just killing time. One day, I was very tired. I decided to go out to my car and take a nap. So, 9 AM, parking lots were usually full. I mean, full. Folks would practically park their cars in the mall parking lot 6 blocks away, where the closest open spots usually were. But there was always a swarm of people driving around the campus lots, trying to find someone who was leaving. I'm cutting through the lot and get to my car. I hop in the driver's seat and lean back. Didn't even turn on my car. Just simply leaned back and closed my eyes. About 2 minutes in, right before I'm about to doze off, I hear a slapping noise against my window. I snap awake and see this woman wild-eyed and frowning, looking in at me. She motions for me to open my window. I'm not about to do that. I say loudly, what? You faking leaving or not? What? No, I'm just gonna lean back and take a nap. What? No, you're in your car. You have to leave. No, I don't. I don't have to go anywhere. I'm taking a nap. Apparently, she had seen me walking through the lot and followed me in her car to my car. When I didn't pull out of the spot, she got out and went up to my window. She screams at me again and taps on my window, telling me to move. I lock my doors and turn the radio on and start blasting music. Just glaring at her, she flips me off and goes back to her car, which she left the door open and had stopped a row of cars behind her. The whole ordeal ended up making me wide awake, and I ended up getting out of my car and going back inside to the art department. I used to work as a front desk agent at a boutique hotel. A guy who was obviously very full of himself came in with an online reservation that he had booked at a shockingly cheap nightly rate, around $40 a night. We usually book rooms for around $160 a night. He proceeded to give me a hard time about everything, from telling me he shouldn't have to give me his credit card info since he had prepaid his reservation. We need it for incidental purposes like if he broke the TV and just left and things like that, to telling me yay, I'm pretty sure I can find the elevators, I'm not stupid. And just being an all-around douchehole. About 10 minutes after checking him in, He came down and demanded that we give him a bigger room with a king bed and a view, even though he had booked a standard queen bed online. I complied, as we had extra king beds available. 10 minutes later he came down again to complain about the size of the room. He told me, "I'm only giving you one more chance to make me happy," and asked for the general manager. After much arguing between him and my manager, we ended up giving him our nicest suite, 2 rooms, kitchenette, and a great view, and free parking, since we had given him trouble. We are located downtown in a big city, so parking is not usually free. He got all this for $40 a night. And get this, he informed us shortly after the ordeal, while on his way out to dinner, that he was not even going to be in the room for the majority of his stay, as he was visiting friends, and would be staying at their home. What the hell? So I made it my personal mission to reset his room keys every time I saw him leave the hotel, which was quite frequently, 3 to 4 times a day/night. It was particularly funny when he came back tired from a night of drinking and had to come all the way down to the front desk to get his keys fixed. Needless to say, he was very frustrated by the end of his stay. I doubt he'll be staying with us again. Sorry for the long post. I was working as a shift leader in a Dunkin' Donuts, spent 2 years in that hellhole, and dealt with my fair share of ridders holes. One particularly memorable day, a group of ladies came in during our busiest hour, just past noon. The line was almost out the door and we were short-staffed, so it was pretty hectic. While they were ordering, one of them asked for a job application and started filling it out on the counter. She handed it back before they were done ordering, and I stashed it on a shelf under the register and started making their food. They had a huge order and we did our best to get it out quickly, but it was obvious from the looks on their faces that we just weren't quick enough for their liking. They sat down to eat their food, and the girl who just turned in her application got back in line. I spotted her right away. She was standing with a glaring face, crossing her arms and tapping her foot, trying her best to look obviously, almost cartoonishly, pissed off. So I motioned for her to come up to the counter, since I knew she had a complaint, and I wanted to get it fixed right away. I assumed that in the shuffle we had messed up her sandwich or something like that. Anyone who's worked in fast food knows that these things happen when it's chaotic. I asked her what was wrong, and she pointed to her bottled Mountain Dew and barked, "Definitely not an indoor voice, this is flat." It was a bit accusing, as though it were my fault that the bottle of soda she just opened was flat. So I took it and told her to get another one out of the cooler, then check it to make sure it was good. After all that, she asked for a refund. I said, as politely as I could, "Ma'am, I replaced your soda. Sorry if there was an inconvenience, but I don't think a refund should be necessary." Something like that. I don't remember my exact words. So she stormed, pissed off, back to her table and started complaining loudly to her group about not getting a refund. So, since I was having an awful day anyway and really could not see a beach like this ever working for us, I grabbed her application from the register, walked it over to the lobby trash can nearest to her table, crumpled it up, and threw it away as she watched. The look on her face was faking priceless. TLDR lady comes in to order food and fill out a job application, is a total beach. I throw the application in the trash while she watches. Edit. Typo. I play poker in the casinos a lot. In one in particular there is a ridiculously loud obnoxious asshole who plays quite regularly cash in tournaments. He fist pumps and yells, "Fuck yeah," when he sucks out on people. Totally uncouth and a complete bag of steamy dicks to everyone in the room. To top it off, he is a larger guy, tattoos, and tries to physically intimidate people. Now, I'm not a small guy in the slightest, 6'4", 230 lbs. But when I'm relatively clean cut, I look very unintimidating. I'm polite and friendly, know most of the dealers and half the patrons by name. What this prick job doesn't know is that I know how to handle myself both in a battle of verbal wit and physical fists. This leaves unafraid of the plausible physical consequences to standing up to him. So one day he was being his typical self, but to a larger degree, and I had had enough. He is verbally berating another player at the table for their faking terrible call, even though the pot odds and eventual results seemed, to me at least, to be a great call. So I just burst out, "Mike buddy, I have been meaning to ask you, How's that violent case of herpes treating ya? The table sits in silence. It takes him 5 seconds to mumble back the typical and incredibly predictable meathead response of, "Ask your mom, she gave it to me." I chuckle and say, leading to my next question, "How are those rap charges common? Cause I know she didn't give it up to your ugly as willingly." He explodes, "Fuck you buddy, I'll kick the shit out of you." The houseman walks up to the edge of the table having heard the escalation in conversation and is about to intervene on my behalf as you are clearly not allowed to threaten other players with physical violence. I raised my hand slightly and indicated that everything was fine, and he holds off and awaits my response. I looked Katnishat right in the eyes and calmly stated, "Buddy, if you can find your balls and figure out how to use them, we can figure this out in the parking lot." "Whatever man," he stuttered back. "So that's a no then?" I asked. Still no real response. "Then maybe you should concentrate on not continuously bleeding chips instead of running your mouth." I got a bunch of thank yous from many of the regulars, even those that weren't there, and heard about it later. I was sitting in a movie theater when I was asked to save 2 seats in the middle of my row. I was sitting on the end. The people asking were elderly and needed to go to the bathroom, so I thought it was of some kind of an importance. The whole row was filled up too, so I figured it'd be easy to save. I sat there for a while when a busty lady made her way up the row and stopped right next to me, at which point she looks at me and says, "Can you move?" I smile with all the awkward tension of any man around giant bazongas and say, "Sorry, I believe those are being saved." Then the lady does something unbelievable. She sort of tries to jam her way past my legs in a mad attempt to get to the seat. Her boyfriend was just standing there. I look at her, flabbergasted, and simply say, "Those seats are saved." And then I shit you not, she snapped her fingers in my face and said, "Watch me walk." At that point, everyone in the theater was watching, and I was having none of this. My face went from an awkward hide-a-ball smile to a solid, "Try me beach" face. I could tell she was getting ready for another assault, so I slumped down in my chair and put my hands towards the seat in front of me, making a desperate attempt to block her, and she was forced to sort of run into my legs a few times. I looked at her boyfriend, and he rolled his eyes and said, "Come on, let's go." So off went busty St. Clair in all her vivacious rage, roaring and raving all the way to the front of the theater. Best part was after the whole episode was over and the elderly couple had returned, the people behind me asked me to save their seats because they thought if anyone could handle it, it would be me. TLDR, got attacked by a rude dragon lady, slayed her, and became the hero of the theater. My wife and I were on the receiving end of someone's justice. We'd gone out to a local sports bar/restaurant for dinner on a Saturday night. Unfortunately, the local football team had just started playing, and the place was packed. While we were waiting in line, we heard the conversation between the folks in front of us with the hostess. "How many?" Guessed. 8 hostess. "Alright, we have you down. We are not quoting wait times right now as the game has just started, and we have no idea how long many of the diners will be staying." Guest, "So you're telling me you won't seat us?" It went back and forth for a few minutes with the guest getting more and more indignant and the hostess trying to explain that they'd seat them as soon as possible. They just didn't know when that would be. And with a large party, the limited number of big top tables would make it worse. And the group was unwilling to split up into 2 groups. The guest finally moves, and it's our turn. We say there's just the 2 of us, and the hostess starts in on the "we can't quote times." My wife say, "Don't worry, we heard what you said to the last person. We are not in any hurry and we know how busy you are right now. We get our blinky alert box and find a spot to wait. We are expecting a solid 45 minutes. Literally 2 minutes later our box starts buzzing. We'd been bumped to the front and were being seated. The best part is that when we got to our table there was another empty table right next to it. The 2 tables could have sat the group of 8, but the hostess and waitresses made sure to not seat them. And the wings were delicious. I work at a bar, and for the past several weeks I've been dealing with a regular guy who just hits on me all the time in the most sleaziest way possible, trying to look down my shirt, touching the small of my back. He even called me his girlfriend to a coworker. I've told him countless times that I'm not interested and that I actually found his advances inappropriate and incredibly rude. Of course this doesn't stop him. Advanced it today. I had the day off and decided that it would be fun to visit work and have a few free drinks while watching the election progress. So I brought my boyfriend to the bar and sit down on a stool, and lo and behold, this guy comes up. He ignores my boyfriend and puts his hands on the small of my back again and says, "Hey you, I have a booth if you wanna put your hands to work." He looks at me and grins a sleazy smile. "Oh yeah, I knew you wanted it all along. You got nice hands baby." I had no idea what he was talking about since I wasn't holding his hand. He then looks at his hands at my lower back and his face goes pale. He isn't holding my hands, but my boyfriend's, who snuck his hand to hold his and made this jerk think that I was holding his. My boyfriend then looks at the guy and starts talking in the most feminine voice. "You know it, baby. Now where's this booth?" He then kissed the guy's hand. The guy's face. Priceless. He let go of my boyfriend's hand and ran out of the bar. My coworker was standing there looking at everything and started cracking up. It was the best. This will get buried, but it's one of my prouder moments, so I'll share it anyway. Every morning on my commute to work I have to take a short boat ride. There's always this asshole who forces his way to the front of the queue to get off the boat first as he rushes to catch a train. All he'd have to do is get the boat that leaves earlier and wait 10 minutes on the other side. Anyway, several times he has either barged into me or pushed past me as he does this. One time he cut in front of me, so close that I clipped the back of his heel with my boot. I ride a motorcycle to work, so I'm wearing fully armored clothing. I called him a cunt, but he didn't hear me thanks to his iPod. Roughly 3 months ago we were getting off the boat when he pushes into my shoulder, incidentally knocking me into a small woman on my right who stumbles. I'm 6 feet 2 inches and wearing fully armored gear, wearing my backpack and carrying my helmet, so I'm heavy, which pissed me off hugely. Now once you're through the doors of the boat there is a short gangway leading to the terminal, which is obviously floating above the ocean. It's roughly 10 feet long and has a waist-high barrier on either side. As he's done this, he's almost directly in front of me now thanks to barging past. I put my hand just off center between his shoulder blades and pushed him forward as hard as I could. He stumbled to the side, bashing into the barrier as he tries to steady himself against it. As this happens he also manages to throw his briefcase over the side into the ocean. I carried on walking with the large rush of people as they piled off the boat with the biggest grin on my face. I didn't hear anything more of it until I come to the boat that same day after work when one of the terminal staff calls me over. Naturally I thought I was in the sheet, but the fella says to me, "Saw that on the CCTV mate." Funniest thing I've seen in ages. One kid deserved it. Best feeling ever TLDR. Impatient angry man annoys me one too many times. Throws his own briefcase into the sea.